the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree. And the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and lifted up the head of the chief butler and the chief baker among the servants, and he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgat him. I could do a whole lesson on that. See? But forgat him. Continuing on, and it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, that he stood by a river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine. And I had to look that word up, because you know that's just one of those words I had to look up. That is the Old English word for plural for cows. It's kine, at least in my dictionary. And fat flesh, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine, so Pharaoh awoke. And he slept and dreamed the 2nd time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good, and behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt. All those folks that on Highway 11 used to be there, like going there by that old boat place near Home Depot. On the left-hand side, they read palms. I don't know if they still do or not, but there's some other places down that you can see palm readers and these soothsayers and all these kind of folks. They called everybody but God. You want to flip one of the 54 cards into tarot cards or whatever they call it, or even a regular deck of cards they do things with now. You got 54 chances to get something right. Well, you know what? God has got more than 54 chances. You see? So he called all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof, and Pharaoh told them his dream, but none they can interpret the dream unto Pharaoh. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do what? Remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants, and put me inward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man, an Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. 14, we'll stop after this verse. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh. And we see here he is coming from, as I've mentioned before, the dungeon room or the jail room, the jailhouse, to the big house. You see? He's coming from the dungeon to the throne room. That's exactly what happened when we got saved. We came from the dungeon of where we were, came to God, and met him, and God saved us. You see? We came from the dungeon to the throne room. You see, we did. You see, God sometimes has to put us in a place where he has to promote us. And understand that promotion, being promoted, doesn't mean like we think we means in a job. Being promoted means promoting God. God promoted Joseph so that Joseph could promote God. Understand that. He didn't promote Joseph for Joseph's sake only. See, he did not. Joseph, remember, is a type of Christ. So it's the prison of his promotion. Well, first of all, let's look at the problems of the prison. Well, number one, this is a painful prison. You say, well, in verse 20, we're told that Joseph was put into the prison. There's no mention, Brother Marty, of abusive treatment. There's no mention that, it does say he was bound in fetters, but I beg to differ. Psalms 108, 105, 18 tells exactly how Joseph felt in that prison. So turn there if you would, please. Psalms 105, verse 17. Psalm 105, verse 17, real quick. I want you to see it. Sometimes if you're reading in a certain chapter, you might not find out certain things unless you go to other parts of the Bible. Psalm 105 tells exactly what happened and the pain that Joseph felt down in that prison, and yet he was in charge of some of the prisoners. Psalm 105 verse 17 says, he sent a man before them, even Joseph, who was sold for a servant, whose feet they what? Hurt with fetters. He was laid in iron until the time that his word came. The word of the Lord tried him. The king sent and loosed him, even the ruler of the people, and let him go free. He made him lord of his house and ruler of all his substance. We see that. But the Bible plainly says there, in reference to this situation, he says, whose feet they hurt with fetters, and he was laid in iron, in verse 18. So we can see that it was not a comfortable situation. So the problem of the prison, well, that's subtitle number 1. We're going to look at it. The problem of the prison, it was painful. So the first thing, it was painful in this prison. You see, it was painful. You see, it's never easy to have these prison experiences of our lives. Some of us may be going through some prison experiences in our lives today. God never promised us a rose garden, so to speak. But God said, I'll never leave you, I'll never forsake you. Now that is said. Amen. You see, 2 Corinthians 12 verse 7 says, and lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of revelations, there was given me a thorn in the flesh. Talking about Paul. The messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. For this I besought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me. And he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in what? In weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities and reproaches and necessities and persecutions and distresses for Christ's sake. For when I'm weak, then I am strong. But I want you to talk about that for a minute, the thorn in the flesh. You know, I've heard people talk about the thorn in the flesh, and some people have said that the thorn in the flesh it could have been a sexual sin. It could have been some other kind of sin. But you know what? One thing that we all can agree upon in this King James Bible is that the Bible calls it a thorn in the flesh, correct? You know why I think that it's called a thorn in the flesh? And of course we can speculate and maybe about get it right. But I believe we can put our own situation sometimes in there, and it enables us to insert our own selves into that situation. New Testament, right? Thorn in the flesh, problems, issues. We can put our problems in there and say those things right there. It's like a litmus test. When I saw that, I was like, wow. Because God could have just said what the thorn in the flesh was, couldn't he? You see? Look at David. How David was hated and hounded by Saul without reason there. And I believe Saul tried to kill David. I believe it was 3 times it was. And I mean, you know, he was persecuted. Elijah, we studied 1 Kings 17 through 19. Things that people go through. Number 2 about this, the problems of the prison is that it's a perplexing prison. You see? But I want you to understand, nowhere do I ever read in this King James Bible where Joseph he did question. The only time he said that was, I should not be in here. But he didn't, not a lot of wallowing in self-pity. Because he said, remember me when you get out. Because I'm a Hebrew boy and I was thrown in here and I shouldn't be here. But that's the only time he makes mention of that. He says, remember me. Jesus Christ shouldn't have died on that cross for us, should he? You see? It's perplexing. He never questioned anything that happened to him during his young life. You see, why was he favored? Why did he get thrown down there? And why, in the pit, I believe it was, why did he get sold into slavery? Why is he in a prison? Why was he placed in charge of people in a prison? Well, he could have said, what's the use? I mean, how many of us would, if somebody